Folks whispered they'd never witnessed brutality out in the open like they did on that sweltering midday. But they were mistaken. Brutality wore a mask, and it belonged to the mob that craved seeing a young lady shatter. The avenue was crammed from the tavern clear to the livery stable. Grit hung in the breeze, glinting like tainted bronze, and smack in the middle the lass was pinned against the whipping post, her tone fracturing as she pleaded for a single soul to pay heed. Nobody would. Sheriff Jacob Hale loomed at her back, his fingers clamped on her arms, pinning her steady. He appeared carved from granite, but his chin clenched hard, and his gaze revealed a feller who loathed every instant of this grim task. Half a century on this soil had toughened him, but not so much that he could overlook the quivering of the maiden braced against the rough timber. The onlookers grumbled. A few branded her a deceiver. Others labeled her thankless. Some hawked phlegm at the ground by her boots. Every last one of them hung on for the show, the degradation ordered by the village elders after she'd spurned the advances of a mighty figure who gripped half the county. The young woman attempted to voice her side, her timber wavering. She claimed she had committed no offense. She insisted she had been set up. She confessed she was petrified, but the elders had already ruled her culpable of tarnishing the settlement. Her pleas drowned beneath the press of a dozen icy glares. Jacob bent near, murmuring soft enough for just her ears. "Keep those eyes wide. Don't let 'em spot your dread. You catch my drift?" She glanced over her shoulder at him, salty trails carving paths through the grime on her face. "Why are you putting me through this?" Jacob stayed mum. He couldn't. He wasn't permitted to voice the facts. He couldn't reveal that the village elders had warned him they'd yank his star if he balked at carrying out the penalty. He couldn't admit that the suitors she'd turned down lorded over their loans, their acres, their tomorrows. He couldn't utter that in this outpost, authority was the rule book, and fairness was whatever folks with deep pockets decreed to do. So there he lingered, caught betwixt obligation and his moral compass, executing a verdict he recognized as unjust. The girl's legs buckled, and Jacob braced her lest she crumple. The onlookers misread it as harshness, whooping like they yearned to see her resolve pulverized right there before him. He'd watched bandits swing from ropes. He'd cradled fellas draining their lifeblood in his grasp. But he'd never burned with shame like he did right then, anchoring a blameless young soul while the whole hamlet bayed for her torment. And off yonder, past the tavern, a horseman was already drawn nigh. It was her paw. Word had reached him, and he carried a verdict that had rattled the village to its foundations. But come his arrival, would that verdict rescue her, or shatter the remains of her days? The avenue cleared out at last as the sun sank below the eaves. Chatter ebbed, heel strikes dissolved, but in the cramped lockup tucked behind the sheriff's quarters, the quiet weighed denser than the mob ever had. Jacob doffed his stet hat and laid it on the desk, his mitts quick and ever so slightly. Perhaps nobody clocked it out in the open, but he sure as heck did. The burden of the path he hadn't taken. The burden of the lass's terror still dusting his vest like fine silt. She perched on a splintered stool, limbs folded around her frame. Her breaths came light and quick, the sort folks draw after enduring a spell that never should have befallen them. Jacob ladled water from a battered pitcher and slid it her way. "Sip some." She wavered, then clutched it briefly. Not a syllable passed between them. The oil lamp danced, casting phantoms over the planks, and Jacob mullered the vow he'd sworn to his lonesome once upon a time, to protect the hamlet, to shield the guileless, and somehow he had botched both in one fell swoop. At length the young woman murmured, "Why did they crave this?" Her tone splintered, not from sobs, but from sheer incredulity, the variety that hits when your universe flips head over heels in a blink. Jacob settled opposite her, forearms on his thighs, puzzling where to kick off. He didn't aim to come off like yet another feller barking at her to simmer down. He hated when gents jawed that way. So he drew air deep and laid out the raw deal in plain talk. The gent you turned down clutches too many IOUs around these parts, and too many souls are in hock to him deep. He leaned on the elders. They leaned on me. The lass averted her gaze, her mandible locking. So the whole town's his puppets just because he's flush? Jacob dipped his chin deliberate-like. Cash and fright turned folks bold in all the rotten directions. She held back the waterworks this time, which oddly twisted Jacob's gut fiercer. When tears quit flowing, hearts often start fracturing unseen. I'd seen that pattern before. Then came the question he dreaded above all. Is Pa on his way? Jacob eased back, letting out a drawn, weary gust. Yeah, he's cresting the bluff right about now, and he's wise to the mess. He hung there a beat. I can't say which flank he'll pick when he rolls in. The girl's digits clenched the mug. You reckon he'll pick the village over me? Jacob held his tongue. He'd beheld solid men forge rotten calls when they figured the walls were closing in. Out yonder, a far-off equine whiny pierced the chill dusk, crisp as a whip crack. Jacob sensed a stir in his ribs, a gut inch sharpened by 30 years toting a 10-star. Somebody was closing in, way too near. He stood, palm gracing the butt of his hollered iron, peepers squinting at the pane. Because if that rider was the one Jacob figured, dawn tomorrow would eclipse every low-down deed the hamlet pulled that day. And the heart of it boiled down simple. When his old man finally strode onto that thoroughfare, would he redeem his kin? Or would he wreck her prospects with his bare mitts? Daybreak hit swift, the brand of dawn that gleams too fierce for the storm it heralds. Jacob had snatched scant shut-eye. He'd peeked at the bluff every tick or two, scanning for a mount, scanning for the codger who might upend it all with a lone phrase. By the hour the orb topped the ridges, the full burg was mustering once again. Gossip zips quick in tight-knit spots, and strife jets even swifter. Jacob escorted the lass to the avenue, measured and firm so she wouldn't falter. She was ashen but steadier than the eve prior. Maybe she had drained her well of weeping. Maybe she flat out had zilch left to forfeit. Denizens lengthed the lane, hissing as the pair ambled by. A smattering seemed reamful, a bunch inquisitive. Most just hungered to see the sequel. Crowds muster lickety-split in podunk burgs, but double when menace simmers thick. Jacob posted up by her near the whipping post. He kept his timber hushed. No matter what happens, chin up high. Got that? She bobbed her head, though her paws shook a tad. It was the grit born of weariness. Not swagger, but grit nonetheless. Then the clamor struck, a lone speed nearing at an even clip.
Building. The throng wheeled as if synced, like geese wheeling on a gust. Her sire, William Thorne, crested into sight. A lanky sort, battered now by endless lean spells and shattered harvests. His blouse caked in trail dust, whiskers ragged, and his peepers bore the stamp of a soul who dodged slumber for nights on end. He swung down mute. He threaded the press like a gent marching to reckoning, not meeting it out. Bystanders parted for him, less from deference than dread of his forthcoming spiel. He halted afore his girl. She essayed to chime in. He raised a palm, not wrathful, merely drained. Hold, let me lead off. The burg held its collective breath. Jacob's innards nodded. He could sniff the wind shiftin', and he despised it on sight. The sire hawked to clear his pipe. His timbre quavered. He owned to the burg why they'd lashed out at her. He allowed he grasped the disgrace they pinned on her. Then his pitch firmed. To cling to the scraps of my spread, and to guard the wee ones, I've struck a bargain. Jacob squeezed his lids shut. He knew this instant would snap the lass worse than the day gone by. And that's precisely where the true hairpin turn kicks in. Her sire hadn't ridden to bail her out. He'd galloped to weigh her prospects against his bare bones hanging on. And the pick he locked in floored every soul on that grit-choked lane. Before we press ahead, draw a lungful alongside me there. Pour yourself a steaming mug of joe, nestle down, and clue me in. What's the hour where you're sitting or tuning in from? And if this yarn's gripping you thus far, mull over hitting subscribe. It props me up more'n you might reckon. The breeze hung altered the split second her sire wrapped his piece. Not boisterous, not subdued, just leaden. Like how a chamber turns when somebody drops a hard pill nobody craved. He'd picked hanging on. He'd picked the homestead. He'd picked the young'uns hunkered back home with barren pantries and frosty eaves. And he'd staked all that atop his eldest girl, the one rooted stock still afore him with brine crusting her cheeks. The press stirred. Some nodded like they cottoned to the call. Others gawked, stunned, even squirmy. But none piped up. None voiced the knot gnawing at every belly there, that no fella ought to pick twixt nourishing his brood and bulwarking the offspring starin' him square. Jacob eyed the lass haul a deliberate inhale. Her jowl jittered, but she willed her spine straight, true to his counsel. She fixed on her sire, hungering for more. Be like a gentler term, be like a hint this wasn't the full gospel. But the elder just bowed his crown. He seemed diminished now, like his ruling had flitched a chunk from him too. Jacob advanced. He held his pitch low, courteous, even-keeled. "Mister, you ain't gotta go through with it. There's alternate trails. Let me scout them with you." The sire wagged his dome. "You don't get it. That lender owns every chit I scratched, every plot, every gasp I owe. If I hold out today, we forfeit the lot." He lingered, and the sprouts got nowhere else to light. Jacob felt that old blaze creep up his breastbone, the vintage ire that would rob him of rest on endless watch shifts. He'd crossed paths with wheeler-dealers like that lender plenty, gents who palmed entire burgs and wrung till right and wrong blurred to haze. So he edged nearer the sire and pitched gentle. "A visitor dropped by my quarters last eve."
Packing ample evidence to enter that lender 6 ways to Sunday. She quaked so fierce she scarce could string sentences, but she hauled in every ledger he buried from the burg's eyes. The elder batted his lids, jolted. "What are you getting at?" Jacob flicked a peek at the rubbernecking throng. He dialed his timber down further. The lender cooked the books on rates. He tacked on borders that weren't in the original deal. He hoodwinked you into hanking clauses you never greenlit. If we haul this to U.S. court, he folds on every scrap he fancies is his. The sire gawped at him, muddled, wishful, spooked in a tangle. "Why hold off till now?" Jacob replied hushed. "Dropping it here is our lone shot to yank your girl clear afore the clock runs out." The lass swung her gaze to Jacob, peepers saucer wide, a flicker reigniting her mug for the first stretch in ages. But hope's a brittle bloom in a burg that cowers from candor, and the lender was already bulling through the jam, his mug flushed crimson, mandible squared, paw on his shooter. One of the elders fidgeted, his frock hiked just shy for Jacob to clock the 6-shooter slung low. And for the maiden mourn that hour, Jacob twigged he wasn't battling a bent lender alone. He was tangling with every palm the lender bossed. When a snake like that slithers ahead, no sunshine trails, and his next utterance veered the whole forenoon off course. And when the lender at last parted his traps, nary a soul on that grit lane braced for the spit he let fly. So what unfolds when the lone wolf strangling the burg finally gets hauled into the light? The instant the lender lunged front, the mob iced up. His spurs rasped the loam, deliberate and fuming, like he banked on the whole shebang to grovel. But something had flipped in that lane. Denizens weren't eyeballing him with terror no more. They were darting to Jacob, then the lass, and last to her sire, who now held his posture a hair taller now that light had crept back in. The lender cracked his yap first. He dubbed Jacob a fabulist. He swore no bench would lend an ear. He spat the lass had besmirched the burg and earned every lash doled. But as he yapped, his pitch hitched in a telling hitch. He was spooked. Jacob slotted twixt him and the lass, no second thought. His star snagged the dawn glow, and for once it weighed like it counted anew. You sheem to corner a cornered man. You sheem to snap his offspring. But facts ain't yours to muzzle. His spiel packed a subdued punch, the breed forged from decades doggedly doing the straight shot, even when it stung deep. The lender clawed for his ledgers, flailing them like bucklers. But a scatter of locals edged in for a gander. One was the mercer who'd been muscled to hawk off half his stock. Another, the dowager who'd hemorrhaged her nest egg to phantom surcharges. More squinted, more masks morphed, a few more inched up. Not a swarm, just a fistful. Most of the mob hunkered, leery a back in the fading nag. But even half a dozen siding up in a fear-fueled fief was plenty to rattle the lender. The lender's phiz contorted, fury swamping his scant wits. His paw slid off the sheaves and latched by hog leg on his belt. In a blur, he whipped it loose and trained it dead on the sheriff's brisket. The sire lunged ere any other could twitch. He hurled his frame betwixt Jacob and the boar, snagging for the muzzle with both paws. Itching to plug somebody? Plug me up front. I'm the fool who scrawled those chits. His timber wobbled, but the gist rang true. I won't barter my blood for dirt. Not one more tick. The lass strove to retort, anguish choking her tongue, but for the first go she spied the patry famless she'd banked on clawing his way home. A still blanketed the lane, the hush that pins the tick when a kinfolk sprouts vertebrae. Jacob hoisted the sham deed aloft for the full mob to clock. If we drag this to federal court, candor triumphs, and if candor triumphs, this lass struck's free with her honor, and her kin clings to their patch. Even his quails now eyed wary. Not all hollered him down, but none stampeded to flank him, and a gent bereft of a posse packs no wallop. Her sire edged her way, then braked mid-stride. His paw twitched up askant as if aching to bridge the gap, but remorse pinned it low. He couldn't lock stairs with her, not post the line he'd drawn. She rooted there expectant, but he was the one who shattered the gaze first. In the end, she gulped a languid pull of air. Her pitch was soft, but each syllable thudded like gravel. I got no hearth left, but I'll never bow again. She wheeled from the press, her footsteps deliberate yet sure as she ambled towards the unbound trail past the final shack. She spared no backward peek. Jacob tracked her fade, the star on his chest hanging like lead. Then he clawed it loose, unclipped it, and let it plunk into the powder. Wordless, he tailed her, hanging a shade off, nigh enough to sentinel her, distant enough to grant her the reins. Yarns like this nudge us that pluck springs from everyday souls on grit lanes. Folks who grab facts, even when facts drag like anchors. So, let me ask you, if you were standing in that crowd, would you step forward for what is right, or stay silent and hope someone else speaks for you? If you enjoyed this journey, tap the like button and subscribe so you never miss a story. Pour yourself a warm cup of tea.